In this episode of Translation Thursday, we're going to look at a pretty awkward sentence and how sometimes getting the relationship among the different phrases right can be a bit of a challenge. In Mark 8:28, it goes, and coming him, so there's a genitive absolute, when he came to the other side of the country or the region of, and most Bibles go with Gadarenes. If you check the text critical issue, you can realize down below that you can also spell this place Gerasenes or Gergesenes, but most people go with Gadarenes. So the region of the Gadarenes, and now here we have this main part of the sentence. Subject is to met him, meaning Jesus. Okay, so two people, two men, met Jesus, and now he's going to tell us something about these two people. One is that they were demon-possessed, and the other is out of the tombs they were coming. Now, this is a little weird to have a participial phrase where the what follows the participle is actually before it. So normally you would expect a participle before the prepositional phrase, but you don't have to. So they were demon-possessed, and they were coming out of the tombs. And then he continues, violent so they were extremely violent people, and the result is that not able anyone to pass through that way. Okay, so just a result clause using an infinitive. So that's normal Greek. But here's the interesting point. How are you going to define these two people as both demon-possessed, but then you have this participial phrase coming out of the tombs, and what does it modify? Well, it tells you when they met him. So you have the two who are demon-possessed, and in one sense, the two were coming out of the tombs, but the point is they were coming out of the tombs when they met Jesus. So you've got this phrase down here that you got to somehow connect up here. So if you look at the different ways in which the translations have done it, the NASB actually does a pretty good job. When he came to the other side, into the country of the Gadarenes, two men. It's interesting, isn't it, that they say men? You know that from the masculine form of the participle. There's no Greek word men, but that's okay. Two men who were demon-possessed met him as, in other words, they're translating the participle as a temporal, as they were coming out of the tombs. Then also notice what NASB does. This is quite stylistic. It's very, very common to take long Greek sentences, which are longer than we can do in English, and put them into two sentences. And in typical NASB fashion, when they've inserted words in order to make an independent sentence out of the second half, you have to supply the subject and the verb. But that's perfectly fine translation. They were so extremely violent that no one could pass by that way. It's actually a very good translation, and surprisingly for the NASB, a little more attention to style than you normally see. It's interesting, when you come over to the ESV, look what they do. And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two demon-possessed men met him, coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. Well, what's going on here? Well, first of all, this isn't really English. I mean, would anyone talk like that? Two demon-possessed men met him, coming out of the tombs. Well, who's coming out of the tombs? Well, technically, if you look at the English, you can't tell whether the him is Jesus who's coming out of the tombs or the men who are coming out of the tombs. I don't know at one level, certainly in context, you would understand that. But yet, this is awkward because the participial phrase isn't connected to the first potential antecedent, is connected to the second potential antecedent, which is very poor English. And then they were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Makes pretty good sense because the people who were coming out of the tombs were so fierce. That's perfectly good translation. I found it interesting to pop over to the NIV, which is generally a little more dynamic. In this case, is a little more word for word and a little more awkward than the ESV, which is not normal. But when he arrived at the other side of the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. Well, that's not really English either, isn't it? It's 2 demon-possessed men who had come or who were coming from the tombs met him. And also, just like the NASB, they start a new sentence, they were. Now, if we were going to say this in perfectly smooth, proper English, how would you do it? Think about it for a second. Well, I think what you would say is, 2 demon-possessed men came from the tombs, comma, met him, comma, and they were so violent. That would work really well in terms of natural flow and sequence in English. But I thought it was interesting that you have a stylish NASB and a very awkward ESV. But again, to everyone's credit, this is a confusing passage because the participial phrase goes all the way back up to the verb, bypassing 3 other elements of speech. Greek can pop these things around wherever they want in the order of the sentence. It's no problem. But in English, we need to keep modifiers close to the word that they're modifying. Just an example of the kind of challenges of writing proper English and still being true to Greek.